Welcome to Portraits of the Past, where we explore the lives of those whose legacies continue to echo through time. The year is 423 BCE. In the theater of Dionysus, on the southern slope of the Acropolis, a comedy is being performed for the citizens of Athens. The playwright is Aristophanes. The target is a man in the audience. The play is called The Clouds, and it presents its subject as a comic fraud, a hollow intellectual who charges fees to teach young men how to make the worse argument appear the better, a man who peers at gnats through tubes and suspends himself in a basket to contemplate the air. The mask on stage has been carved to look like him. According to later tradition, at some point during the performance, the man stood up so that the audience of thousands could look from the mask to the face and back again, and remained standing without expression until the scene had passed. The man's name was Socrates. He charged no fees. He taught no techniques. He had no school, no fixed doctrine, no written word to his name. What he had was a method, a way of asking questions that left every person who encountered it either transformed or furious, and frequently both. He was 66 years old when Athens put him to death. He remains, more than 2,000 years later, the most consequential philosopher in the Western tradition who never wrote a single line. Athens in the 5th century BCE was, by any measure, an extraordinary place, and also a deeply anxious one. The city that had turned back the Persian invasion at Marathon and Salamis, that had built the Parthenon and funded the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, was also a city held together by the fragile consensus of direct democracy, permanently at war with Sparta, and acutely aware that the cultural confidence of the age was balanced on a political structure that had no precedent and no guaranteed future. It was the age of the sophists, professional teachers, many of them brilliant, who traveled between city-states selling instruction in rhetoric, argument, and the arts of persuasion. In a democracy where speech was power, the ability to argue effectively was worth paying for, and the sophists charged accordingly. The result was an intellectual marketplace that was genuinely exciting and, to traditional Athenians, deeply unsettling. If every position could be argued, if rhetoric was a technique that could be sold, then what did truth have to do with it? Into this world came Socrates, born around 470 BCE in Athens, who charged nothing, claimed nothing, and operated in the same streets and gymnasia as the sophists. To many Athenians, he was one of them. The distinction Plato would later draw between Socrates and the sophist tradition, the noble philosopher who sought truth against the mercenary rhetoricians who sold technique, was, in significant part, a retrospective boundary. Plato drew it with great skill and with genuine conviction. But in the Athens of the late 5th century, the line was not so clear, which is precisely why Aristophanes felt no need to explain the joke. What Socrates looked like is, for once, reasonably well established. Multiple ancient sources, Plato, Xenophon, Alcibiades in Plato's Symposium, describe a man who was physically unprepossessing, stocky, flat-nosed, with protruding eyes and a distinctive rolling gait. Alcibiades compared him to a Silenus figurine, those squat, ugly satyr statues that could be opened to reveal a golden figure inside. The comparison was affectionate, and it was also analytical. The exterior concealed something that the exterior gave no indication of. He was not wealthy. His origins were modest, the son of a midwife by his own account in Plato's Theaetetus, a detail he returned to with evident affection as a metaphor for his own philosophical practice. He dressed simply, wore the same cloak in all seasons, and by most accounts went barefoot. He fought in the Athenian military. The sources place him at the campaigns of Potidaea in the 430s BCE, Delium in 424 BCE, and in the region of Amphipolis in 422 BCE, and Plato's accounts of his conduct under pressure are among the most striking passages in the early dialogues. Alcibiades, who served with him at Potidaea, describes him walking through a retreat under enemy fire with the measured pace of a man taking a morning stroll. So conspicuously at ease, Alcibiades says that the enemy did not attack him, reasoning that a man that calm must have resources they could not see. His daily method was disarmingly simple. He went to the agora, to the gymnasia, to the workshops of shoemakers and craftsmen, and he asked questions. Not rhetorical questions designed to prove a point, genuine questions, or questions that appeared genuine about things that everyone assumed they already understood. What is courage? What is justice? What is piety? What is knowledge itself? The interlocutor would answer. Socrates would thank him, express admiration for the answer, and then ask a small clarifying question, then another, and by some process that the interlocutors found almost impossible to resist and equally impossible to retrace afterward, they would arrive at a position that contradicted their original answer, or that contradicted itself, or that revealed that they had never actually examined what they believed at all. This process, the elenchus from the Greek for examination or refutation, was not, Socrates insisted, designed to humiliate. It was designed to expose what he called the most dangerous form of ignorance, not simply not knowing something, but believing that you know it when you do not. The conviction behind the method came from an episode Socrates described at his trial, reported in Plato's Apology, involving the oracle at Delphi. His friend Xenophon had asked the oracle whether anyone was wiser than Socrates, and the oracle had replied that no one was. Socrates, who found this baffling, set out to disprove it by finding someone wiser than himself. He went to the politicians, who seemed to know much about governance. He found they knew nothing and did not know they knew nothing. He went to the poets, who had composed works of great beauty. He found they could not explain what their own poems meant and believed, on the strength of writing beautiful verse, that they understood everything else as well. He went to the craftsmen, who genuinely knew their trades, but they also believed that their skill in one domain gave them authority in all domains. Socrates concluded that the oracle had been right in a narrow and paradoxical sense. He was wiser than these men only because he did not mistake ignorance for knowledge. He alone, he said, knew that he knew nothing. The men he attracted were, by and large, young, intelligent, and from families of means, the sons of the Athenian elite, who found in Socrates something they could not find in the formal philosophical schools or the sophists' classrooms. He did not sell them a doctrine. He invited them into a practice. Among them were men who would reshape the ancient world. Plato, who encountered Socrates in his youth and whose philosophical output over the following decades would be inseparable from the attempt to preserve and extend what Socrates had been. Xenophon, the soldier and historian whose more practical temperament would produce a very different portrait of the same man. And Alcibiades, brilliant, beautiful, catastrophically ambitious, whose relationship with Socrates was the subject of one of Plato's most psychologically penetrating dialogues, and whose later career would contribute directly to Socrates' ruin. There was also the matter of the daimonion, the divine sign. Socrates described it consistently across Plato, Xenophon, and other sources as an inner voice, or more precisely an inner prohibition, that warned him away from certain actions. It never told him what to do, it only told him what not to do. In 5th century Athens, where the boundary between the human and the divine was a live political question, this claim was not insignificant. A man who received direct divine guidance outside the sanctioned channels of oracles and priestly tradition was either something remarkable or something dangerous. Athens would eventually decide which. The city Socrates moved through was changing around him. The Peloponnesian War, which had begun in 431 BCE, ground on for nearly 3 decades, draining Athens of treasure, men, and the confidence that had defined the city's golden age. The disastrous Sicilian expedition of 415 to 413 BCE, an audacious attempt to extend Athenian power westward that ended in the near-total destruction of the expeditionary force, had been championed by Alcibiades, who then defected to Sparta. Critias, another figure who had been part of Socrates' circle, emerged as one of the most brutal leaders of the 30 tyrants. The oligarchic junta installed by Sparta following Athens' final defeat in 404 BCE, before being killed in the fighting that restored the democracy in 403 BCE. The restored democracy operated under a formal amnesty. Crimes committed before 403 BCE could not be prosecuted. Athens was attempting to heal, to move forward, to rebuild the civic life that the war and the tyranny had damaged. But the amnesty could not erase what people remembered. Socrates had not taught Alcibiades or Critias to betray the city. There is no serious scholarly argument that he did. He had taught them to question, to examine, to subject received ideas to rigorous interrogation. What they had done with that education was their own. But in a city that had just endured what Athens had endured, the distinction between a teacher and his students' crimes was not always one that grief and anger allowed. He was 70 years old and still walking the agora, still asking questions. The city was beginning to ask different questions about him. The problem at the center of any historical account of Socrates is one that has no parallel in the study of other ancient figures. The man left nothing written, and everything written about him was produced by people whose relationship to him was too close and too partial for any of it to be treated as simple documentary record. 3 primary sources define what scholars call the Socratic problem. Plato's dialogues, composed over roughly 4 decades following Socrates' death, present Socrates as a philosophical protagonist whose ideas grow across the corpus, progressively more Platonic. The early dialogues, such as the Euthyphro, Laches, and Charmides, are generally held by scholars to be closer to the historical Socrates. They feature the characteristic elenctic method, end without resolution, and decline to advocate for specific metaphysical doctrines. The middle and later dialogues, the Republic, the Phaedo, the Symposium, present a Socrates increasingly at home with elaborate philosophical theory that most scholars regard as Platonic in origin. The line between the historical and the Platonic Socrates cannot be drawn with precision, and scholarly opinion varies considerably on where particular dialogues sit. Xenophon's Memorabilia offers a portrait of a Socrates more practical, more conventional, more piously orthodox in religion, and considerably less philosophically penetrating than Plato's. Scholars debate whether Xenophon presents a more accurate version of the man as he actually was, or whether his more practical temperament simply recorded what he was equipped to notice. The two portraits are not entirely compatible, and they cannot both be entirely right. Aristophanes' The Clouds, performed during Socrates' lifetime, presents a Socrates who charges fees, teaches rhetorical manipulation, and runs a school called the Thinkery. Virtually all of these details contradict both Plato and Xenophon. The play is valuable as evidence of how a portion of Athenian public opinion perceived Socrates or was prepared to laugh at him. But it is comedy, not biography. The anecdote that Socrates stood during the performance so the audience could compare him with the stage mask comes from Aelian's Varia Historia, written roughly 6 centuries later, and must be treated as later tradition rather than documented fact. What the sources agree on: Socrates did not charge fees, did not write, used a questioning method, claimed a divine sign, served in the military with distinction, and was executed by Athens in 399 BCE. Everything beyond this core is, to varying degrees, reconstruction. There is a case to be made that Socrates is the most influential figure in the history of Western philosophy, not because of any doctrine he advanced, but because of a practice he modeled and a death he chose. The examined life, as he framed it in the Apology, is not merely an intellectual preference, it is a moral demand. The argument is that a human being who does not interrogate what they believe, who they are, and why they act as they do is not, in any meaningful sense, fully living. But the more uncomfortable observation, the one that Plato spent his life circling, is that Athens examined Socrates in return and found him dangerous. The city that produced him also killed him, and the question that has not been resolved in 2,500 years of argument is whether Athens was entirely wrong. Socrates taught Alcibiades and Critias. The method does not guarantee the outcome. The examined life produces citizens. It also occasionally produces something else entirely. That tension between the freedom of inquiry and the authority of the community that sustains it has never been resolved. It was not resolved in 399 BCE, and it is not resolved now. The paint is dry on this chapter, but the archives are vast. Subscribe and return to Portraits of the Past. The next exhibit awaits.